It was early in 1964 that David Oldmeadow and Malcolm Douglas gave up their jobs to travel Australia. The dogs shared the excitements and dangers of the trip. Suva is dead. Scruffy survives. Climbing into the front seat is Malcolm, who came to boarding school in Australia from the phosphate island of Nauru. He left school to join a wool firm, working on the big outback stations, and later becoming a stock agent in the bush. Malcolm and David originally planned to be away for 12 months. The 12 months stretched into 4 years. Always moving on, looking for new adventures. How does such a journey begin? They bought a Land Rover, spent 12 weeks fitting it out and buying equipment. On a cold winter day in June, they left Melbourne behind and headed north. Many city dwellers must long to do the same. For most, it would be better to share David's and Malcolm's experiences through this film. This remarkable film deals with the last 12 months of this journey, showing areas that few people have ever seen. From Darwin to Cape York, through little-known Arnhem Land, around the Gulf of Carpentaria, then up the Cape York Peninsula to the very tip of Australia. Malcolm Douglas and David Oldmeadow take you across the top.
Darwin, capital of the Northern Territory, one of the fastest growing cities in Australia. The port of Darwin, busy wharves on the edge of a tropical harbour. Nearby, the Methodist Mission supply boat has been beached for repairs. On the incoming tide, we climb aboard, ready for our trip along the Arnhem Land coast. Leaving the harbour, we sail out into Clarence Strait, heading for Van Diemen's Gulf and the Arafura Sea. The boat is manned by a captain and crew of full-blood Aborigines. They carry supplies to isolated mission stations along the coast of Arnhem Land. These settlements support about 3,000 Aborigines. 2 days out from Darwin, conditions are good with only slight seas running. Days and nights of this, and we reach Milingimbi. Supplies are unloaded, and we disembark. Suva and Scruffy have had quite enough of the sea. They're anxious to get ashore. For Dave and me, this is our second trip to the island. Old friends are here to meet us. Milingimbi is situated on one of the Crocodile Islands, 3 miles from the mainland. It's a mission caring for about 700 Aborigines. They camp beneath giant tamarind trees, which grew from seeds left here hundreds of years ago by traders from Macassar and the Celebes. Under the biggest tamarind tree, a group of Aborigines from the mainland is camped. One of these is Malungi. He should be famous, yet few people know of his existence. Malungi painted the design for Australia's $1 note. Malungi is the only adult male left in the Manuranu tribe. Each tribe has its own ceremonies and totems, and only the fully initiated men are permitted to paint these symbolic designs. In 1963, Mr. Carol Kupka of the Paris Museum visited Arnhem Land to study Aboriginal art. He collected a number of paintings, including some by Malungi. Mr. A.C. Macpherson of the Reserve Bank of Australia saw these paintings in Paris, and one of Malungi's was brought back to Australia. Eventually, it was chosen for the new $1 note. Some people say that Malungi's style has been influenced by Western art, but Malungi has spent most of his life in the bush. He's had little contact with Europeans. Malungi takes a few draws on a longi, a style of pipe introduced to the Aborigines hundreds of years ago by the traders from Macassar. Here, Mulungi paints the story of the death of a great hunter, the original guardian spirit of the Manurnu tribe. That's the hunter in the centre of the bark. He's been away all day hunting. He's caught goannas, emu and wallaby, and he's collected wild fruit and yams. He camps beside a waterhole, lights a fire, and throws the wallaby cut into pieces onto the fire to cook. A snake slithers out of the long grass, strikes, and the hunter dies. The figures squatting around the hunter are members of the tribe, singing the story of the great spirit hunter and how he met his end. When Mulungi finishes his painting, I show him a $1 note, and he explains the story to me. This legend of the original guardian spirit being bitten by a snake and dying is always sung today when a member of the Manurnu tribe dies. This old woman, her face distorted by the dread disease leprosy, waits patiently for the end. Days later, she is dead. Dave and I, because we've been accepted by the tribe, are allowed to watch and share the people's grief. The dead woman's relatives keep up a continuous wailing and throw themselves on the ground. A blanket covers the dead woman and her closest relative, a sister. The grief-stricken sister appears for a drink of water, and the wailing goes on. The husband shows his anger and drives the evil spirits from the camp. He believes these spirits caused his wife to die. All day, all night, the mournful wailing continues. The men gather and begin the long death ceremonies. These Aborigines believe that when a person dies, the spirit leaves the body and returns to the sacred tribal waterhole. Each tribe has its own waterhole somewhere in Arnhem Land. When the initial shock of the death is over, preparations are made to help the spirit on its journey. Age-old dances mime the wanderings of the soul to its final resting place, the sacred waterhole where the tribe actually keeps its sacred totems and ceremonial objects. And when the spirit finally reaches the waterhole, it assumes the identity of one of the sacred totems, usually a fish or an animal. These totems are now being painted on the bodies of the ceremonial dancers. The people believe that if they fail to give the spirit the correct farewell, it'll return and cause trouble. The tribe's sacred waterhole is symbolized on this man's body. This must be done so that the ancestors of the deceased know the correct waterhole to guide the spirit to after its wandering. The paint is white clay mixed with water. The brush, a piece of stick chewed at the tip. Here, ritual objects are prepared for the dancers. It takes all day to paint the intricate designs on the bodies of the dancers, and finally, their faces are whitened with clay. Spray painting in its oldest form. Backstage, the men receive their final instructions. They dance at sunset, and within minutes, the artistic designs on their bodies are washed away with perspiration. Leaving the preparation area, which is forbidden to women and children, the men move into the main camp where everyone can watch. The dancers stir up the imaginary waters of the waterhole, chasing the catfish. They mime the actions of all the animals associated with the age-old rites. And so the old woman's spirit is led to its resting place with song and dance. Leaving Milingimbi, we head for Nungalala on the Australian mainland. Scruffy and Suva have to travel steerage. The natives are afraid of them, and Suva doesn't like it one bit. Nungalala is situated on the edge of the vast Arafura swamp. That's it, marked in green. This is one of the most remote areas in the whole of Australia. The Arafura swamp is only part of Arnhem Land. It's a huge area of wild country set aside for those Aborigines who still prefer to live a tribal way of life. These semi-nomadic people are the ones Dave and I are going to live with for the next 5 months. The camp at Nungalala is just a scattered collection of bark huts. The population varies from 20 to 80, depending on the season. It's the end of the day and the women are arriving back in camp after collecting firewood. That 4-gallon drum is full of water. It weighs at least 40 pounds. Each man has a number of wives and many children. And although these people are now Australian citizens with the right to vote, they speak no English and have little understanding of white civilization. When this baby is a young man, his tribal life will be gone, and this film will become a record of a lost way of life. This couple is exceptional. One man, one wife. The husband, Rachi, has been promised other brides, but he gave them away to his brothers. He's devoted to his first wife. As they sit together, she twists strips of banyan bark into bush string. It's very strong, and Rachi will use it in his fishing nets, his spears, and totems, and she'll use it for making baskets. Rachi carves a goanna, a lizard. He'll sell this to the mission, which will send it with other totems to a tourist shop somewhere in Australia. Rachi and his wife will use the money to buy commodities introduced by the white man, such as guns, torches, and fishing lines. Now Pupu weaves a dilly bag. She'll use it to carry her belongings and for collecting food, wild fruit and berries. A cheerful soul, though she suffers dreadfully from sore eyes caused by sleeping too close to the smoking campfires. Commotion in the camp. A python has just been killed and Jungle Bali becomes a teacher. He calls the children together and explains that this snake is not poisonous. It can be eaten. The python is not eaten raw, though, so the children are giving a lesson in fire making. First, take a loose ball of bark fibre, put it on the ground, hold it in place with a strip of softwood. The softwood has been slightly grooved in one place. The firemaker puts a hardwood stick into the hollow and rotates the stick quickly. In a matter of seconds, the dust from the softwood begins to smoulder and overflows onto the bark fibre beneath. The fibre is picked up smouldering and then gently coaxed into flame. And there it is, homemade fire in 30 seconds. And once the fire is good and hot, the snake and a long-necked tortoise can be tossed onto it. Aborigines cook their food very quickly and eat it almost raw. With a genuine bark tablecloth and a hand for a knife and a foot for a fork, it's time to tuck into hot, steaming snake. Rachi says there are plenty of fish in the river, and somehow this appeals more than snakes, so we decide to try and catch some. Rachi tells us that the barramundi will be spawning in the overflow from the wet season, and so towards the top of the river, the boys and I organise the net. Dave motors to the very beginning of the river, where the noise of an outboard is heard for the first time. He turns around and watches for signs of the fish. There they are, their dorsal fins breaking the surface. The boys and I anchor the net securely to the banks and in midstream to stop the strong current, ripping it away. We head upstream and plunge in amongst the fish to drive them into the net. Now, what's for dinner? Just look at that, a great stack of barramundi. These are the most delicious fish in the north. They're caught in freshwater and in salt, although the freshwater fish are inclined to taste a little muddy. While we're at Nangalala, the government sends in a helicopter to assist with the preliminary surveys of the swamp. From the air, we can assess the potential of the area far more quickly. It's a strange feeling to look down on vast areas of Australia still unexplored and quite unknown. It's a fantastic natural sanctuary for the birds. Below, you can see the main tidal river near our camp. It twists and winds far back into the unknown interior. Dave and I intend to explore this river by boat. And then the helicopter crashes. Luckily, we're not on board for this flight. The pilot on another survey trip strikes trouble and force lands. We make up a search party, and 24 hours later we find the wreckage. But the pilot's gone. Dazed and injured, he's staggered off into the bush. 12 hours later, we find him wandering, lucky to be alive. And we are too. There's a hole in the cockpit made by a rock, and that's just where we would have been sitting. Dodie, the bark painter, is one of the searchers. And while he's in this new area, he decides to get some bark before returning to camp. Dodie inspects many trees before he finds a suitable one. The bark must be full of sap, otherwise it'll split as it's removed. He places a forked branch against the trunk, climbs up, and cuts the bark high above the ground. Finally, a stick is used to lever the bark completely free from the trunk. Deciding on the best section to use, he cuts it free. Now the long walk back to Nangalala. After heating the bark over a fire and keeping it flat with stones for several days, he begins. Dodi is the leader of the Wagalug myth. The Wagalug myth is the story of two sisters and their children as they journeyed through Arnhem Land in the dream time. Dodi paints a yellow ochre line. It represents the faraway land from whence the Wagalug sisters came. Dodi the painter uses yellow and red ochre, white clay and black charcoal. These are the only colours used in bark painting. As he needs them, the colours are ground on a stone and mixed with water. He treats the bark with the juice of wild orchids. This stops the dried ochre from flaking off. But to get on with the legend, the Wagalug sisters travelled through Arnhem Land, naming the rivers, the mountains, the jungles and billabongs. And these places are still sacred to the Aborigines to this very day. Eventually the sisters camped beside a billabong, and then a great snake, Ulungur, slithered out of the water and swallowed the women and children. The snake can be seen encircling the four figures on the bark. Ulungur became very sick, reached and spat out the women and children onto the ground, where they turned into stones. And these stones are still there and may be seen today. As he finishes the painting, Dodi paints in the rays of the sun. It takes Dodi a week to finish this painting, and then we sit together and he tells me how the Wagalug men, missing their women and children, set out for Arnhem Land in search of them. They discovered the blood-covered stones and they knew that something terrible had happened. That night, as the men were asleep, the spirits of the Wagalug women came to them and taught them all the sacred songs and rituals. The women told the men that they must circumcise their sons as a sign of manhood, a custom which is still practiced today. And at Nungalala, Dave and I witnessed one of these sacred initiation ceremonies for ourselves. These two boys are being prepared for the ceremony which will take them from the status of women to the status of men. They are to be made men of the tribe. From the ages of 12 to 14, all boys go through a period of intensive instruction in the myths and beliefs of the tribe. Before the actual ceremony, the totemic designs of the tribe are painted on the boys' bodies. Dave and I spent so much time with these people, we were allowed to witness these extraordinary rites. The ritual area of the camp is cleared and the final dances begin. Over the next hour or so, the tension mounts towards a frightening and unforgettable experience, even to an onlooker. Fear on the faces of the boys. The singers and didgeridoo players begin their final songs. The dancers move in, surging around the initiative. The boys are placed on top of their uncles and pinned in position. The men cry out to help the boys bear the pain and prevent the women from hearing the screams. Once, a sharp shell was used. Today, it's a razor blade. The men crowd in around the doctor. You see, it's taboo for the women to watch. The circumcision over, the boys are rushed back to the men's ground where many taboos are placed on them. They're not allowed to speak for weeks. They must not eat many types of food, and to look at women is forbidden. The bleeding is stopped by placing a heated leaf from a particular tree over the wound. The leaf stops infection and promotes healing. The tension over, the proud doctor takes a drink of water from a paper bark vessel. With the ceremonies over, the dry season ahead, the men prepare to go walkabout. The main preparation is the making of spears. The shafts are long jungle saplings which the men heat over the fire and straighten while they're still hot. Jungle Bali uses his powerful jaws to complete the job. These men intend to walk from Nungalala to the Arafura Billabong, where a number of their relatives are hunting crocodiles. Remember that river we saw from the helicopter? Dave and I plan to get to the headwaters by boat and then walk across to meet the tribe. This should take only 3 or 4 days using the outboard motor. Aborigines approach in a dugout canoe. They're hunters from Milingimbi. Shortly before our arrival, they had killed the biggest crocodile in living memory. We were staggered by its size. It's gigantic. Never had anyone seen such a monster as this. Even the old men say it's the largest croc ever seen in this region. And it takes 10 men to drag the monster from the water to a clearing where it can be skinned and butchered. Skinning a huge crocodile like this is a major operation. Years ago, the skin had no value, but today it'll be sent to Darwin, where there are good prices, $140 for this one. The men shot this croc with an old wartime .303 as it was sleeping on the riverbank, and then they harpooned it as it slid into the water and pulled it back to shore and finished it off with an axe. Such massive jaws. Crocodiles of this size are a menace to cattle. And here you can see its tremendous size. The hunters are more interested in the meat than in the skin, and more care is taken when the carcass is butchered. The backbone is removed, exposing the stomach, heart, lungs, and intestines. Considerable time is spent looking for a small hormone sac amongst the fatty tissues near the stomach. They tell us that this provides a juice which stops infection when applied to wounds. Now the heart and intestines. The natives dote on the stomach lining just as tripe lovers enjoy their tripe, but with this there are no onions. The meat is divided up according to the position in the tribe. The more important members get the best cuts. 5 hours later, the crocodile is nothing more than a blubbery lump of meat. The skin is rolled up, ready to be sent by canoe back to Milingimbi Mission for sale to dealers in Darwin. And we continue up the river. Towards towards the top of the river, conditions deteriorate. Half-submerged logs and floating debris from the last wet season make travelling very difficult. At last, the head of the river. The water's too shallow to continue any further. The river is still tidal, though we are many miles from the sea, so we unload our gear and store it well above the high water mark. It's a long walk from here to the Arafura Billabong. You know, few white men have ever been this way. But we were here 2 years ago, and the Aborigines showed us the way across the hills and through the swamps. And this time, we hope to find our own way. The smoke ahead, which means the men from Nungalala are not far away. They burn the country as they travel to make it easier for walking on their return. The sheer weight of that pack, more than 100 pounds, begins to tell on Dave. A snake. These add to the hazards. Now Suva joins the party. Both these dogs attack snakes without fear, and only instinct protects them. One bite and either dog would die just as quickly as Rastus. Our first dog died in 1965. The fight's over, and Suva rejoins Dave as he begins looking for a campsite. Evening comes, and with it, chilly mists and vicious mozzies, and we roll in close to the glowing fire and the pest-proof smoke. The swamp people have heard we are coming. They've left a newly made dugout canoe on the bank of the Arafura Billabong. Dave and I paddle precariously to the other side. And there they are, waiting. These people are really the last Australian Aborigines living as a tribe on their tribal land. And even so, civilization has caught up with them. They wear a few clothes, and the young men carry rifles more often than spears. Their few possessions are purchased on the occasional trips to the mission to trade. Bundalil is a hunter. He tells Dave about a piece of steel he's just acquired and how he intends to make himself a new fish spear. The handkerchief on his head and his singlet are always clean. Every morning he bathes and washes his clothing in the nearby Billabong. Dorichinini has a bag full of tortoises for his relatives back at Nungalala. Tortoise is the best food the swamp has to offer, so he says, but I'm not so sure. This little girl is terribly shy. She's had practically no contact with civilization. It's an old bush saying that where there are goannas, you'll never find snakes. Perhaps this is why. Dave just shot this goanna, and inside there's a snake as long as your arm. Dave gives the goanna to Nulmama. He's delighted. Goanna's a real delicacy here, and it's soon sizzling on the fire. There's not much fat on most bush animals, but these goannas have a thick layer of yellow fat on each side of the tail. The Aborigines really go for this in a big way. One of the most interesting reptiles in the swamp is the file snake. It gets its name from a very rough skin which resembles a rasp or file. The file snake lives in the water. It's tremendously active and swims at a great rate. But put it on land and it loses all control of its movements. It isn't venomous and if handled gently makes no attempt to bite. But treated roughly, it can turn quickly and inflict a nasty wound with its large teeth. How do you catch a file snake? Come with us and share an amazing experience. On the way to the billabong, Nulmama spears a goanna. And then, through the tall swamp grass, we come across a backwater covered with water hyacinth. The men wade in and drive the snakes towards the bank. The reptiles panic, and as they try to double back, they are grabbed by the swamp people. A startled fish leaps. These billabongs are infested with crocodiles. Just before I shot this film, we saw a big one slide into the water, but no one here seems to care. Milperu grabs a tortoise. And the drive goes on regardless of crocodiles and fallen trees. To kill a file snake, the jaws must be held tightly closed to stop it biting as its spine is snapped. This boy is one of the few Aboriginal children left learning the old ways of survival. He copies everything his father does. As the snakes and tortoises are caught, they're quickly killed to prevent their escape. And after the morning's hunt, snake and tortoise is naturally the main course for dinner. Tortoise, rich in protein, is always cooked in the shell. This is the one that got away. After the hunt, the men rest while the women do the cooking. Tortoise meat is white and oily, but after long periods in the bush, it tastes delicious. The afternoon is spent sleeping, and later in the day, the croc hunting begins. Hunting crocodiles from a dugout canoe using harpoons is a highly skilled art, and only the most capable hunters are successful. Milperu is the best, but it's a team effort, and he'd be lost without his paddler, G'day G'day. Milperu sees a croc and signals directions to his paddler. The paddler, often unable to see the crocodile, works only by signs. He must be accurate and silent. Milperu drives the harpoon home, aiming for the back of the skull, the center of the nervous system. It's still very aggressive, and G'day G'day takes no chances and bails out when it attacks him. Milperu tires it out before pulling it into the canoe the second time. even if the croc is exhausted now. G'day is still nervous. He hesitates before going ashore. In 3 weeks, these 2 men caught 18 crocs, worth $800. Dave shot this one near the camp. When a crocodile is shot, it sinks straight to the bottom. After 36 hours, it floats to the surface, and the skin is still valuable if taken straight from the decaying body. This one stinks, and it's a case of move the croc or move the camp. Diriginini thinks I'm mad going to so much trouble pulling the croc onto high ground, but my idea is to build a hide nearby and film the birds feeding on the carcass. By moving into the hide before dawn and waiting, not even the crows are aware of my presence. And then the hawks arrive, driving the crows away. And as the sun comes up, things really begin to hum. In this climate, what with the heat, the maggots, the birds and the insects, a carcass disappears in no time. And this is all that's left after 5 days. Food deteriorates so quickly the Aborigines go hunting every day. This boy is collecting water lily bulbs. Quite unworried by the crocodiles, he gropes in the mud for the bulbs. The water lily bulbs are the Aborigines' substitute for potatoes, although they taste more like wood. The other type of craft used on the swamp is a stringy bark canoe. It's just a long strip of bark bound together at both ends and held in shape by 2 pieces of stick. This canoe is used in shallow water where its pointed bow can penetrate the reeds. G'day and Watadee are hunting for tortoise and small crocs. They hunt with the sun directly overhead so that the quarry can be seen in the water. The canoe looks so easy to handle, I just have to have a go. Aborigines have no feelings for the birds and animals they hunt, but they never hunt for sport, always for food. This is really brutal. Primitive man spearing a pelican to death. Cruel, you say? Well, this is how man survives in the bush. The pelican is food. The man must feed his family. And once his family has sufficient food, the Aborigine will not hunt again until everything is eaten. On the main billabong, pelicans rest. But all's not well. Something has disturbed them. It's a crocodile. We have special permits to carry high-powered rifles in Arnhem Land for pest destruction, and this crocodile could well attack the Nungalala cattle, so it'll have to be destroyed. The secret of stalking is to keep low and move slowly so that no sound is transmitted through the ground to the crocodile. Dave can't see the croc, so I creep in behind a cabbage tree palm and give him signals. The croc is shot. Now it's a race against time. I hop into my speedboat and roar into the water. I found him, and now it's just a matter of getting him ashore. Dave has one last look at this forgotten land. For now, we must return to our boat and continue our travels. After the long walk back to the river, our luck runs out. There's no water, and our boat's stuck fast in the mud. We came up the river on the high spring tide, but with the neap tide, the water just won't come this far. We wait for 24 hours, hoping, then decide to push the boat with its 800-pound load back towards the sea. The heat is intense, and this is truly a stinking job. We labor for hours, knee-deep in the clinging mud, and both collapse exhausted. And then a change of luck. The tide comes in, first as a trickle, and then as a gushing torrent. And Milperu, realizing that we might have been stuck, has walked over to give us a push, but he's too late. So he picks up his spear and begins to jab it in the water. The river is full of small fish. They've come up with the tide to catch the insects caught in the sticky mud. Here, Milperu demonstrates another lesson in survival. Now the long trip back to Nungalala. From Milingimbi we'll fly to Elcho Island, where we'll take a fishing boat to the Wessel Islands, where we'll be shown a cave with paintings, and then back to Elcho, and so by plane to Darwin. Over the last 20 years, most of the Aborigines have voluntarily moved into the mission, and now there are over 800 full-bloods. Half of these are children under 14 years of age. If the bush people of Arafura wish to, they can travel to the mission and receive training in many fields. One of the biggest centres of training on Elcho is the sawmill. This boy has become skilled in his trade. The large building behind the sawmill is a school. 11 trained white teachers and several trainee Aboriginal teachers give the children just as good an education as that received by children anywhere in Australia. The mission has also trained Aborigines for commercial fishing. The boats are supplied by the mission, and the catches are sent to Darwin each week. In their efforts to help the Aborigines integrate, the mission has taught them to fish for others, not just to fish for themselves. A fishing trip lasts up to a week. This boat is heading for the Wessel Islands, 70 miles to the northeast. Remote, barren, but beautiful, with long, white, sandy beaches. The natives are keen to stop here so that they can hunt stingrays, one of their favourite foods. Spears are fixed to woomeras, and there's the quarry gliding across the sandy bottom. A spear is driven home, and the excitement begins. The rays, when speared, settle into the sand and are difficult to shift. The boys make sure that they keep well clear of the long tail with its poisonous barb. As soon as the ray is beached, the barb is removed and tossed onto the sand for someone else to step on. They're heavy too, and it's a long walk back to the boat. On the fishing boat with us is old Jingaloo. This island is his tribal territory, and he often returns here from the mission. One day he promises to show us some paintings in a cave on the other side of the island. He says he's only showing them because we're his friends. It's a long walk, and we begin to wonder whether it's worth it. At last, Jingaloo shows us the opening to a cave under a hanging rock. It's well hidden, and it'd be impossible to find unaided. And there are the paintings, perfectly preserved. How old? Well, who knows? But they are a record of early sailing ships which passed this way many years ago. Were they traders or explorers? Whoever they were, they made quite an impact on the native artists of Wessel Islands. Jingaloo believes his grandfather painted most of these, and he takes great pride in methodically explaining the paintings to us in the same way that he would teach the young men of his tribe. Here, a superb painting of an early pearling lugger in full sail. The boats are interesting, but how about the strange men in top hats smoking pipes? Some have a diagonal cross painted in red ochre on their chests, which suggests to us some kind of uniform. You know, Matthew Flinders sailed this way in 1801. The animals are dingoes. But who were these men in top hats who came here many years ago? Dutch explorers? Japanese fishermen? Police from Brisbane? Or early pioneers? It's a strange unanswered question about Australia's early history. Now we must leave Jingaloo and his cave paintings and return to Elcho Island in time to catch the plane for Darwin. One last look at Milingimbi as we head for Darwin. Darwin seems busy and unfriendly after the peace of the remote Arafura swamp. The famous Stuart Highway. It's tarred and sealed all the way 1,000 miles to Alice Springs. At the turnoff, an accident. The truck taking stores to Borroloola has dropped its bundle. The U-bolts holding the crate to the tray snapped, and rations for remote stations are scattered everywhere. Drums of flour and a stack of grog. The road to Borroloola is fair and our progress good. Here's a typical bush sign, changes in the wind. Doesn't matter how you spell a name so long as you get the right idea. Two frill-necked lizards catch our attention. Disturb them and they become quite fierce, snapping and puffing up their frills. And so to the broken down, forgotten town of Borroloola. The store, owned and operated by the Gulf Trading Company, supplies station properties for hundreds of miles around. And who remembers the old hand pump Bowsers? If you don't die of lung cancer, you can always blow yourself up. You know, it's 100 degrees in the water bag and the petrol fumes are fairly visible. But he couldn't care less. And we never realised ourselves till we saw this film back in Melbourne. There's no other store for hundreds of miles, so we buy up for weeks ahead. It's shopping day in Borroloola. The girls from some distant station are having a day in town. They've come in to pick up the stores that we saw scattered on the road 240 miles back. East of Borroloola, along the Gulf of Carpentaria, we're in some of the most isolated country in the whole of Australia. There are few roads, no amenities, and very little communication. The outback stations in the dead heart with their two-way radios and airstrips are civilised compared with this. At this stage, we're running out of money, so we decide to head for the coast, where there's a good chance that we'll shoot enough crocodiles to pay for the rest of the trip. We pull into Manangora, a 1,500 square mile property owned by Andy Anderson. He's almost a hermit. These two old Aborigines look after him. This real territory character was a lifelong friend of the famous bushman and author Bill Harney, and what a character he is. Andy Anderson came back from the First World War with Bill Harney. Both of them settled in this never-never land. His tin shanty has a dirt floor. Split logs make a table and benches. He lives on salt beef and damper, and he gets his metho in 44-gallon drums to drink, not to light the lights. He's only left the property once in 1948 when he travelled to Townsville to have his teeth out. Andy Anderson directs us to what he calls an ideal camp. But the humid weather, the stinking mud, the sandflies and mosquitoes make it hell. These tidal rivers and estuaries are the home of the big saltwater crocodile, and we hope to get enough to pay for petrol, film and food, and to get us all the way across the top. The first night we set a line baited with barramundi, and this is what we catch. It's an 11-foot hammerhead shark, so heavy that we have to use the winch on the Land Rover to drag it from the water. Hammerheads are found in waters around the world, but they're interesting because of the strange shape of their heads. This shape allows the fish to swim with a minimum of movement. The streamlining is almost perfect, and with eyes mounted in the extremities of his hammerhead, the shark has nearly all-round vision. They're inquisitive too, and they often give us worrying moments when they circle our boat. We're after a feed of fish, so we swim our gill net across the nearby tidal river, and as we pull it in, we find it's been completely wrecked. The trapped fish have attracted dozens of sharks, which have ripped through the net, tearing it to shreds. All that's left is a barramundi, cleanly bitten in two. Only the smaller sharks have become entangled in the net. The larger ones have torn themselves free. Look at them. Bronze whalers and blue pointers. We're going to have to watch our step in this water. Disgusted, we leave the sharks and the net to rot. During the next 6 weeks, hundreds of river miles will be clocked up as we keep on the move, always looking for signs of the croc. One must have complete understanding of their habits and environment before attempting to hunt them. Huge crocodiles often lie in the sun at the water's edge, and only the slightest hint of danger and they disappear under the muddy water. Once a croc is sighted, the hunt begins. After leaving this area for a few days, we come back to find this fresh slide. It's low tide and the croc must have slid into the water only minutes ago. The belly and claw marks left in the mud suggest that it's the same croc, possibly a 13-footer. The only way to catch this one will be to leave a set baited hook. Heavy nylon cord connected to a chain trace and a large shark hook will do the job. The hook is baited with a piece of rotten crocodile tail and it's hung just above high water mark. Crocs go for rotten meat and they have an acute sense of smell to help them find it. There's a good chance that we'll hook him during the night. Early next day, we find that we've been successful. The croc's dead. It's drowned itself attempting to break free. It's heavy work dragging him up the slippery bank. The dogs try to help, but only make matters worse. Dave thinks it'll be a good idea if we hang him up in a tree to get a better look at his size. So, for 3 hours solid, we struggle to get that carcass up above the ground. We even tie up some of the trees when they sag down on us with the colossal weight. Crocodiles have enormous power in their jaws and tail, and it's easily seen here how they can grab fully grown cattle and drag them into the water. This crocodile will take 2 hours to skin, and then the skin will be salted down and packed in the boat until we return to base camp. And you know, we have a problem. Shortly after we set out on this trip, Dave became a diabetic. It was touch and go whether we could continue. But Dave doesn't complain. He lives with his problem, and nothing deters him from the hazards and excitements that many a completely healthy person would balk at. Every morning he gives himself a shot of insulin, not in the most hygienic conditions perhaps, but without it he knows that he couldn't last many months. While Dave's having his insulin, I'm getting breakfast. So far, one small croc. And there's a snake. I attempt to grab it, but it strikes and bites my hand. It's one of the constrictor family. It squeezes its prey to death before consuming it. This is how he works. Incidentally, watch for the blood on my hand from his bite. He twists himself around his prey. The pressure on my arm is only slight until he hooks his tail across his body, and then every muscle tightens. The pressure's tremendous. Within minutes, he could stop the circulation in my arm. The snake, minus its head, hits the coals, along with 2 small crocs. After months in the bush, the taste is delicious. A few fresh leaves on the ground keep the roast clean. Well-cooked snake and crocodile is very appetizing. The meat is sweet and nourishing. We're on our way back to camp when we smell a shocking stench, something vile. And from the jungle, the sounds of all hell. We've stumbled on a colony of flying foxes. They're known as fruit bats. They live in huge communities and they're found anywhere in tropical Australia. Like all bats, they are nocturnal. They eat only fruit and they camp down at night time in such numbers that they often split the branches from the trees. They migrate from place to place, following the ripening fruit. There are young ones in this colony, clinging to their mothers, who continually flap their wings to keep cool. And as they hang, they urinate, and the excreta dribbles and mats on their furry bodies, giving off the most revolting smell. Unable to get airborne from the ground, they use their claws to clamber to the tops of the trees, and from here they launch themselves into skillful flight. But they land clumsily and sometimes crash after hitting the branches. Dave grabs one for a closer look, but it's savage and it's hard to handle. Dave lets it go in a small clearing, and stumbling awkwardly across the ground, it heads for the nearest tree, sinking its long, sharp claws into the bark to climb to safety. See the youngster still clinging to its mother? Dave gets the young one, but it digs its claws into him. It's got sharp teeth, too, that could give him a very vicious bite. The wings are a thin membrane stretched between extended fingers. He climbs rapidly to a high branch and settles down in a comfortable position. From here we're travelling east across to Burketown, Normanton and Cairns, and then, to satisfy our own ambition, up the Cape York Peninsula to the very tip of Australia. But we must lose no time. The wet is on its way and we could get caught in torrential rains. Just our luck. The rains come early, flooding the almost non-existent track, and we are bogged up to the axles. Dave built the winch. He fitted it onto the front of the Land Rover in 1964, and once again it proves its usefulness. So many times it's pulled us out. We must get moving before this rain sets in. Hundreds of miles to go, and no way of knowing just what lies ahead. With the cable wrapped around the trees, the winch worked so well we almost overturn. We persevere and eventually get going again. Dave and I are worried now. The map we're using seems to be inaccurate. Cattle properties are marked, but they don't seem to exist. Or have we passed them? Petrol's low, and to be honest, we don't know where we are. There's a cattle station marked within 2 days' drive, so we head for that. Situated on a beautiful lagoon, abandoned, is the homestead that was going to supply us with so much information. The isolation and the great distance from markets crippled the pioneering spirit of these early Australians. We move on, hoping for contact with someone, anyone. We don't know whether we're in Queensland or the Territory. Along the track, a donkey brays. He's watchdog for a mob of brumbies, wild horses roaming free after escaping from some station, probably the last one. Brumbies are a common sight in many parts of Australia. Occasionally, they'll round up some and give them to a horsebreaker. For the moment, the rain has gone. The country is arid. We heard later that 10 days after we passed Burketown, torrential rains isolated the town completely. Burketown, did I say? Here it is, a forgotten dump, stuck on a hot clay pan. Never have we driven into such an inhospitable, spiritless town. In the local cafe, "What have you got?" we ask. "Nothing," they say. So we get some petrol and leave. Here's Normanton. It's bigger than Burketown. And look at that dog. He didn't come down in the last shower. See how he keeps cooler in the shadow of his friend? From Normanton to the east coast, the going is easy. Each town looks like the last one. A main street, a few houses, a pub or two. Here an old gaslight catches our attention for a few seconds, but that's all. We keep going. At last, the green of the sugarcane and the blue of the Pacific. And what a marvellous sight after miles of dust. But the journey must go on. The rain is threatening, and it's a long, hazardous trip up the Cape York Peninsula. That's Musgrave Station, and there's the flying doctor's plane. There could be trouble here. Yes, there's been an accident. A stockman's been thrown, and while the doctor tends him, the pilot refuels. He's anxious to get away before the rains come. These are real stockmen, the real Australian cattlemen. They work vast areas of cattle country in a land so remote they don't even look upon themselves as Queenslanders. Peninsula-rights, they call themselves. There's a note of urgency in our travelling now. We've got to get going. The wet has well and truly started, and the tracks are packing up. This chap in an old V8 is attempting the same feat as ourselves, but at least we have a reliable vehicle. We pull him out, and he drives ahead of us up to Cohen. The old mining town of Cohen, 200 miles north of Cooktown, is the last settlement on the peninsula. It's a small service centre and appears to support more cattle than people. The grassy patches in the main street give some idea of how many vehicles pass through this way. It's our last chance to buy petrol and supplies, and from here to the top of Australia, we're on our own. The locals say it's sheer madness to try it now. The wet started 6 weeks ago. The rivers will be in flood, the track washed away. We think about it, decide to give it a go. We know that the locals won't be able to help us if we get stuck, but it's just another risk we'll have to take. A telephone line running up to Thursday Island is our only guide. Ahead, the monsoonal build-up looks a forbidding barrier. During the months of dry season, a contractor keeps the road open for the men who service this lonely line of communication, and as soon as the wet season begins, they pull out and the road is left to wash away. It's now 2 weeks before Christmas. The wet starts at the end of October. The rivers are rising. The track, in places, is gone. Storm clouds, intense heat, and the unbearable humidity remind us constantly of the urgency and danger of our trip. Bogged, abandoned, the old V8. We find the driver's tea leaves boiled over and over again. He had no food, no rifle, bald tires, and an almost useless car. Later we heard that he'd been found stumbling delirious through the bush by a station hand making the last quick trip before the rain. 80 miles north of Cohen, to our amazement, we come across a man with a huge truck hopelessly bogged. He is Col Owers, the private contractor from Cairns who keeps the track open for the PMG. He's left it a bit late getting out, and the road has collapsed under the heavy vehicle. We spend 2 precious days sweating and swearing until we drag that truck clean out of the mud. The 5-ton 4-wheel drive vehicle is bogged deeper than the axles. The truck's own winch is broken, so Col attaches a come-along tree puller to it, plus the winch on his Land Rover and the winch on ours. Oh, it's a terrible job. The first day we make no impression at all. Overnight, Cole pumps the water from the bog with his small portable firefighting unit, and with our chainsaw we cut down trees to wedge under the wheels. And you'd think we weren't pleased to see this sight. Cole's so excited he just about wraps the cables around his front end. Exhausted but smiling, he climbs from the truck. A few words of thanks, a warning about the road ahead, and we're off. The track, already washed out in many places, batters the Land Rover savagely. The rains come down, the rivers rise, and still we press on. In the last 120 miles, we crossed 93 rivers and streams. The four-wheel drive drags the Land Rover forward. The dogs are covered to keep out the fierce sun, and the little trailer carrying precious petrol follows faithfully behind. Even after 140,000 miles, the Land Rover never lets us down. Another crossing. She's rolling. This is a terrible situation. We could be stuck in a river that may rise 20 feet any hour. Axles, bearings, springs could easily be broken beyond repair. The wise old owl thinks we're fools. Dave studies the situation. Yes, it's bad. How are we going to get out of this one? Dave begins backing, and so far so good, till the body jams the wheels, so I have to give a helping hand, and the trailer jackknifes. But at least the vehicle seems all right.
There we go.
Good!
The winch comes to the rescue once again. Ever had the feeling of being watched by a slice of Queensland pineapple? Without the winch, this situation would have been hopeless, with no way of moving the Land Rover. A hurried conference, and Dave and I decide that the boat must go. There's too much weight riding on the top, and the Land Rover's rolling crazily. We'll pick up the boat later, if we make it back. Suva is dying. After travelling with us for 3.5 years, he's not going to make it back to Melbourne. He is to die at the top of Australia of a fatal heartworm disease transmitted by mosquitoes. The last major crossing is reached. This is the Jardine River, only 20 miles from the tip of Cape York Peninsula. This wide, fast-flowing stream has had us worried now for weeks. In Cohen, the locals told us that even if we did reach the Jardine, it would be far too deep to cross at this time of year. And it does look grim. Wet season clouds threaten. Any hour from now, the river could rise 10 or 20 feet. If we do get across, it could rise behind us and trap the Land Rover at the top for 6 months. We decide to wait overnight and watch the river carefully. A marker is fixed in the water and the river levels are noted. At every deep water crossing, Dave waterproofs the electrical wiring with grease, removes the fan belt, and covers the motor with a rubber sheet. This careful preparation could mean the difference between success and disaster. Next morning, we're very relieved to note very little difference in the water level, and the crossing of the last barrier to the top begins. Half an hour later, we drive past an old wartime jetty, still used by the local Torres Strait Islanders. After travelling together for nearly 4 years, we stand together at the top of Australia, looking out towards the Torres Strait Islands, realising that this is the end.